Dr. Johannes Lehmann is the Liberty Head Bailey Professor of Soil Fertility Management at Cornell University and a renowned scientist in soil biogeochemistry. He has published over 300 peer-reviewed publications, including Nature, Nature Communication, Nature Geoscience, Nature Climate Change, Science, Scientific Reports, and PNAS on sustainable soil management, carbon sequestration, and environmental pollution. Since 2014, he has been recognized as highly cited researcher by Thomson Reuters and as the only current Cornell faculty in any scientific field listed in 2 disciplines since 2017, a distinction that only 147 scientists received worldwide in 2017. He has served on the U.S. Department of Energy and Agriculture Biomass Research and Development Committee, on the USA Technical and Management Advisory Committee for Pulse CRSP, has testified in the U.S. Congress and briefed the Presidential Council of Advisors, IPCC Workgroup on Geoengineering and Workgroup 2 of Scientific Conference of UNCCD, among others. Dr. Lehmann was elected to the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in 2023 and the German National Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina, in 2018. Received the Hans Fischer Senior Fellowship of the Institute of Advanced Studies at the Technical University of Munich in 2016. The Humboldt Research Prize of Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in 2020, the 2014 International Research Award of the American Soil Science Society, was elected Fellow of American Soil Science Society, received the 2012 Marion L. and Christy M. Jackson Award on the Soil Science Society of America, the 2010 Sunny Chancellor Award for Excellence in Scholarship, the 2007 McMaster's Fellowship of CSIRO, and served as Editor-in-Chief for the International Journal Nutrient Cycling in Agro-Ecosystems, Springer, for 7 years, and is on the board of several other environmental sciences. Dr. Lehmann, it's such a pleasure to host you. You are such an accomplished researcher and educator. Thank you for taking your time to engage in this conversation.
Thank you very much for hosting.
Great. Shall we begin our discussion?
Yes, please.
Great. It is no doubt that climate change has negative effect on farming patterns, particularly on small-scale farmers who rely on predictable weather and climate patterns for food production and their livelihood. If we have to mitigate the effects of climate change, we have to give research a priority. Dr. Lehmann, are you seeing the adoption of research-driven policies?
It would be nice if I could be really positive and upbeat about that, but I think we severely lack the important policy drivers that are enabling farmers to address and adapt to climate change. I can speak a bit to soil management. There are important ways that farmers can at least partially mitigate the effects and adapt to climate change. I think the most important one might be to increase soil organic matter contents, because soil organic matter sits at the heart of what is by now known as soil health. Regulating water, regulating nutrient availability, regulating soil biota. So enhancing organic matter in soil will help under any circumstances, but is especially critical when rains are getting scarcer, or during flash floods. Of course, not everything can be mitigated with better soil management, but some of the most severe challenges will definitely be addressed to some extent by increasing soil organic matter, and that is that can be that knowledge can be traced back decades, almost hundreds of years. So that is not new science, new insights. The question is, how can we help farmers to do that? And because the carbon needs to come from somewhere, that we add to soil or that we retain more carbon in the soil. And there's a one carbon molecule is only there one time, so we can allocate it either to feeding animals, to thatching a roof, or to eating it ourselves, or to putting it in the soil. So these competing uses need to be addressed, and there are plenty of ideas that can be tried out, and that policy drivers need to be put into place that allow farmers to experiment and optimize their carbon management so that they're maximizing economic outcomes as well as retaining carbon in the soil.
Great. So I know you have done a lot of research, and 300 publications, that is no joke. Have you had any direct interaction with small-scale farmers in regard to something like you're talking about, increased soil organic matter, regulation of water, regular soil biochar? Have you had direct contact with small-scale farmers, or do you even have a program that is going on that is helping small-scale farmers, or rather you're also supporting it from far?
Yeah, I've lived in Kenya in the mid-90s, and have had Kenyan graduate students throughout the years of 2000. And we worked quite a bit in Western Kenya, in the Kakamega and Nandi areas, with small-scale farmers, hundreds of small-scale farmers, where we mapped out the soil carbon contents in the region and looked at how far the soil carbon contents have slipped, have declined since these soils were cleared from the native forest. And these soils have been cleared from native forest at varying times in the past, and it looks very, very clear that within the first 5 to 10 years, farmers are losing anywhere between 40 to 60% of the organic matter in the soil, and with that, they're losing the ability to retain water, the ability for infiltrating water during strong rains, and to retain nutrients. So the decline in soil health is very markedly monitored and concurrent with a decline in soil organic matter. There are some resources on farms that can be used to mitigate these declines, and we've together with the World Agroforestry Center and IITA and the University of Nairobi, we've had a dozen graduate students asking questions to small-scale farmers in the region to see what resources are on the farms. We mapped with remote sensing what organic resources there are, the hedges, the grasses, the small shrubs, trees. Now, where are resources? What are they used for? To avoid competing uses, and see how much carbon can we harvest from so-called unused areas, paying particular attention to what kind of current uses there are, and especially if they're browsed or grazed by animals, because that also, of course, needs to happen. And having a close look at nutrient and carbon recycling. We also looked at on-farm nutrient resources. There are large nutrient resources that are currently poorly used and even pollute drinking water, such as human excreta and non-functioning sanitation systems. In Kenya, the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that is currently going into toilets, or even worse, into rivers and streams, is about 5 times larger than Kenya imports as fertilizers or adds as agricultural fertilizer to soil. So by smart recycling of nutrients and carbon, we can dramatically improve soil health and crop productivity. So there are ways of doing that. The solutions are always highly local. So as you implied, it is absolutely necessary to work with farmers, and what works for one farmer doesn't work for the next farmer. And if we're going into a different climate zone, all the bets are off. Nutritional habits, dietary preferences, cooking preferences, they all play a big role. So we have to pay attention to all of these. So a cookie cutter, one size fits all approach will never work. It will not work in Kenya. It will not work in any other farming system in the world. That doesn't mean that we can't learn from each other. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a solution. We just need to have tailor-made solutions that work for that particular farmer.
Yes. And isn't that what policy is supposed to do? Include, like, look at all those variables. What works for another farmer might not work here. What works in certain climate conditions might not work here. What works in a certain group of people because of their dietary patterns might not work here. That is sort of what a policy is supposed to be looking at. But looking at how our policies are made, do you feel like, do you think analytically, I don't want to say feel, but looking at how our policies are made, do you see in a very scientific way, like, we will be able to achieve this? Because it looks like we have the solutions. We know the solutions, but the ability to implement those solutions is somewhat limited.
Yes, because it is not a simple rollout of one idea. It is an adaptive process that needs the information, the skills, and then a path towards local discovery. One can also use the word co-creation of solutions between an extension officer or industry and the farmer, and to have this structure in place, that needs financial resources, because the farmer needs to try things out, and then there need to be resources so that the farmer can actually access loans or other means of obtaining a certain technology, but without risk that might not be the right technology. But there are a lot of different ideas that have to be tried out, whether they work or not, and that needs to come at no risk to the farmer. So that there's and then there can be learning between farmers. Also, that requires a at best a government structure that allows this lateral learning to occur, where those farmers that have tried something out and it works on their farm can tell that story to other farmers, and see whether that can spread beyond their own farm, fully knowing that what works on their farm might not be the right solution on the next farm over. But at least it's a way of starting the conversation, and trying something out.
Yeah, and it has to start from somewhere.
Yeah.
As you do monitoring and evaluation to see how it's going, but it has to start from somewhere.
Yeah, precisely. Yes.
Great. Let's go to your work. What is the role of biochar in promoting plant productivity?
Yeah, so biochar is a carbon substance obtained by a process called pyrolysis, which is a fancy word for a thermal decomposition of organic matter, which most people are familiar with under the term charcoal making. But the difference to charcoal making is that when we make biochar, we are making a product that improves soil health and is not necessarily burning. So a biochar might not even be useful as a fuel, whereas some charcoals are not very useful as a soil amendment. But there is, of course, a strong overlap between charcoal and biochar, and in principle, the process is the same: heating under the exclusion of oxygen. Biochar can be made from nutrient-rich materials, including excreta and agro wastes that would normally not be added to soil because they're not safe to be added. And by thermally treating those residues, they are sterilized, and any organic pollutants are removed. The incentive of looking at a material such as biochar is to expand the organic feedstock streams, or the organic materials that can be added to soil, make them into a better soil amendment that retains nutrients and water more efficiently than uncharred material, and that is very important, for a much longer period of time. So charring a leaf will increase the persistence and durability of that leaf by orders of magnitude. So when I add a maize leaf and maize residues to the soil, they will be decomposed and will be invisible within months. Definitely after a year, you can see anything of the crop residues from last year. If you would char this material and add it to the soil, then 80% of that carbon would still be there after a century. So converting organic matter into biochar dramatically increases the durability and persistence of that organic matter, boosting soil carbon contents with all the benefits that we know that organic carbon in soil possesses. And that can be a very important increase in beneficial soil functions, especially in soils that are acidic and those that are sandy. And from own experience, I know that especially in Western Kenya, Bungoma region, and so there are highly acidic and sandy soils. Again, context matters. Some soils have high pH in those soils. Biochar, especially more alkaline biochar, will not have the beneficial effects than in sandy and acidic soils. But we and extension officers and farmers already know looking at soil properties and adjusting soil management to soil properties is of course standard practice. So looking at your soil properties and identifying what the problem is with the soil, and especially if farmers think that increasing organic matter will be important in that particular soil, then considering biochar additions to that soil is a really good way of starting your own experiments. There are some projects and companies already that are offering biochar-based fertilizers. So those are organic fertilizers that contain some biochar, where nutrients are mixed with biochar and compost, and those approaches have shown some really good and promising results in the last decade.
I actually got very interested with biochar. I went to visit a farmer who is doing providing biochar to other farmers, and he has a demonstration farm here in Kenya, and he's using rice husks. So it doesn't burn them completely. So I found that as a very good way also of managing waste.
Yes, especially the waste that you would otherwise not know what to do with, and they might even be a hassle to dispose of. Rice straw and rice husks accrue to a certain degree that it's really difficult to know what to do with. You cannot add them as they are to soils, even if you wanted to or you had them. It's a bad idea. But making biochar out of rice husks or rice straw and adding the biochar to soils is very often a very good idea, especially when mixing it with composts or composting them or mixing them with nutrients is a very good idea. Biochar, especially crop residue based biochar on their own are of course no fertilizer. It's carbon material. So they're not substituting nutrient additions, but they're enhancing the efficacy of nutrients that are added or already in the soil. So that is important to know.
Yeah. So when that happens, the soil is able to, the crops are able to receive the nutrients from the soil, and that does, of course, enhance the crop's productivity. This farmer, I actually did do a taste of their vegetables, and there was a very clear difference. Like you could literally feel the taste. The smell is so different because they are doing organic farming. So it's completely so different. You can taste and you feel, wow, even if you did the any analysis, I did not do any scientific analysis, but the biochemistry of food can be measured through taste and the smell, and you can tell the difference. So when I did that and I cooked that, it is so different. It's so soft. That tells that you're able to get, say, for example, with spinach, you're able to get the iron that your body needs in the amount that, say, for example, 100 grams of spinach has 20 milligrams of iron. Then you can argue that there's no significant difference in what you're getting from that farmer. So I have seen it work. I have been to that farm, I've seen it work, and I got so interested in biochar. And how is it helping in mitigating climate change?
Yeah, so one important greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, and biochar, as I mentioned earlier, is reducing the decomposition of crop residues. So the return of that CO2 that is fixed by photosynthesis into plants, if crop residues or organic matter is added to soil, microorganisms in soil are quickly under the warmer and very often humid environments of Kenya, for instance, crop residues would very quickly be decomposed and the carbon released as CO2 into the atmosphere. converting that crop residue into biochar is reducing that decomposition, and therefore that carbon stays in the soil for 1 to 2 orders of magnitude longer. And so that constitutes a carbon dioxide removal. In addition, it has been shown through comparisons of the global literature that nitrous oxide emissions from soil are reduced, and methane emissions are from decomposing crop residues is completely eliminated. So there are a few pathways whereby not only CO2 but also methane and nitrous oxide emissions from soils can be dramatically reduced. There are some uncertainties in terms of the longevity of, for instance, nitrous oxide emission reductions, and those at the moment the longest field trials in that we know of, and I know from Kenya are about 3 or 4 years. So we don't know what happens in 10 years. At about the 3 or 4 year mark, there is still a 10 to 20, 30% reduction in nitrous oxide emissions, down from about 50% reduction. But we don't know whether after 10 or 20 or 30 years that is also still the case, or what the reductions might be. So there's still work to do, especially long-term field trials, not only to look at crop growth and crop yield, but also greenhouse gas emissions and their reductions over time. So that's a task that has still to be done. And since the research on biochar has only started about a decade ago, some of these long-term trials have simply not been done yet. But it is very clear that over the course of several years, greenhouse gas emission reductions are significant, and the carbon is sequestered for the long term because we can use natural analogs of carbon cycles, and longer term field trials have been conducted in other parts of the world.
Great, and that's the important part of research. There has to be ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it has to be in the local context. So it would be really useful to start benchmark research field trials across Kenya that are looking at the opportunities to sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in major soils across Kenya.
Right. So we're going to go to carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration, I don't want to define it. I want you to define it.
Yeah, I actually don't like the word carbon sequestration, although sometimes I use it myself. So the goal of carbon sequestration is to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide removal is a better term to use. And in the context that we are discussing, we can achieve carbon dioxide removal through accruing carbon in the soil. And why I use the word accruing or accumulating rather than sequestering is because sequester implies that we put it there and we can forget about it, and it is locked away for a long time. And that is never a good way of looking at soil carbon, because actually it's a much better way to look at soil organic carbon as a flow-through reactor, where we constantly have to feed the soil with carbon, and we have to make sure that we minimize carbon losses. While biochar is in itself a very long-lived form of carbon, at the heart of it, and seen over very long periods of times, of decades and hundreds and thousands of years, it's still this view is still necessary. It will decompose eventually. So retaining it in the soil will also require what I would call constant care rather than sequestering, which is, trying to shut the door and throwing the key away. And so I think the notion that we have to curate and take care of our soil organic carbon stocks through smart management of adding organic matter as part of our farm management, making sure that we lose as little carbon as possible by making smart choices in terms of how we till our soils, how we protect the soil surface, how we manage water. That all goes together. Again, it's not a one size fits all. It's all the little choices and all the little experimenting that we can do to accrue carbon in soil, which then decreases carbon in the atmosphere. And with biochar, the question from what kind of organic matter one makes that biochar, not only from a material properties point of view, but also what would the fate of that carbon have been if I had not come and made biochar, is very important. So the easiest example is if you take a big tree in the field that would still live there for another 100 years, there's nothing better than let that tree stand there. So felling that tree and making biochar out of it is certainly a very bad idea. But taking organic matter that might go into a landfill or might decompose very quickly, maybe generate methane because it's in that landfill, or empty fruit bunches from palm trees that are decomposing and rotting and producing methane. There's nothing better than making biochar out of that material, because not only will we increase the lifespan of that organic carbon in soil by several orders of magnitude, but we also will completely eliminate the methane that would otherwise be produced. So looking at what are the different opportunities for which residues generate under business as usual the greatest and the most harmful amounts of greenhouse gases, such as methane, and converting them into biochar so that they are retained in the ecosystem longer than under business as usual, is very important. Again, context is everything.
Context is everything. Right. So something that you said that is it in Kakamega where you said in 5 to 10 years, if I got you right, that 40 to 60%, they are losing 40 to 60% of the organic matter in the soil.
Yes.
That's a lot.
That is a lot, yeah. And a lot of, when we did this assessment, that was in 2005 to 2008. A lot of these soils that we surveyed had been cleared only in the years prior. So they still had quite a bit of carbon in them. But looking at soils that had been cleared 10, 15, 20 years earlier, we can see where they will end up in just a few years later. So I agree with you. It's an unfortunate, very dramatic decrease in soil organic matter within just a few years. I would think that, and we've done dozens of on-farm trials with farmers in the region by adding crop residues, by adding legume mulches, by adding even sawdust as a sort of dramatic way of adding carbon, as well as biochar. And it is very difficult to stop that decline. when you are using annual cropping systems with maize. It's very difficult with carbon amounts that would be at hand in such a farming system to stop or revert that loss of carbon. So that actually now requires some more dramatic external resources to add to soil.
And now, do you see how that now connects to malnutrition, micronutrients deficiency, which we are battling here in Kenya? Like the problem is literally the soil. And I just have to be very honest here in Kenya. We are not seeing policies that are really looking at holistic soil management and it being driven at the forefront, because and it's not just the micronutrients deficiency and the malnutrition, as we say, but generally it becomes now a public health problem, because if people don't have the right nutrients, they definitely become vulnerable to certain diseases, and the health of our nation just keeps deteriorating because we are just not handling soil very well. And it surprises me that we have such good climate conditions, so to speak, because Kenya is along the equator, it's not badly off, right? But the fact consistently keep fighting malnutrition and food insecurity, and the health of our people keep deteriorating just because we are not doing that right. It really just does bother me a lot. It really.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. Micronutrient deficiency is a huge problem, and the good news is it's a fixable problem if you know what to do and what micronutrients are the problem. But you're absolutely right that these lesser known nutrients, most farmers are simply managing soil fertility and crop productivity with nitrogen, maybe phosphorus, maybe potassium. But nobody looks at zinc or molybdenum or boron, and these could be the most important. It could be so a viable approach would be to survey the soils of Kenya and identify which regions have symptomatically which kind of micronutrient deficiency, and then automatically blend these micronutrients into commercially available fertilizer. The farmer doesn't have to know about it, but it's like a toothpaste. If you have fluoride in them, it doesn't matter whether your water is rich or poor in fluoride, or your diet is rich or poor in fluoride. You just have the manganese and the molybdenum, boron, or whatever micronutrient is known to be lacking in a certain region of Kenya. You just have it mixed in the DAP fertilizer, and you can't avoid adding it, and it will supplement your crops. Another approach is, of course, to use organic fertilizers. If you're mixing organic and inorganic fertilizers, you will always have some molybdenum, boron, or zinc in your organic composts, and you don't have to worry about that you don't add enough. Especially if we're getting into hopefully at some point into a more widespread approach of converting animal and human excreta into fertilizers, then everything we withdrew from soils, we will automatically add with organic fertilizers back to the soil, including the micronutrients. And I think that on the long run, that will be the most sustainable way if we're moving to what we call a circular bionutrient economy. So a circularity of a view that what we withdraw from a crop, from a field, that we transport into Nairobi, that is eaten by a person or by an animal, that is returned to the agricultural field after it has been consumed. So a circularity of an approach is absolutely needed for sustainability on the long term.
Mm. So you and I, we're seated here, we are talking about this, and we know it's actually doable, it's actually possible. Where are we getting it wrong enough?
Yeah, well, there's always the big difference between there is an idea that technologically maybe even works, maybe the technology is at the horizon, but then maybe the economics don't stack up because there are some perverse incentives no, that just don't work in favor of a sustainability practice, or there are regulatory hurdles, or there are behavioral hurdles that we just don't want to do that. We could just switch off the lights in the evening or use certain resources less. Especially in the US and Europe, we could save a lot of energy by behavioral change, but we don't do it for all kinds of reasons. So we also need to start prioritizing sustainability practices. But I think we can get a long ways already by taking down regulatory hurdles and revamping our economic incentives so that they're actually supporting sustainability practices and not putting up hurdles. And that's where policy is, of course, required. And there are some interesting ways that carbon markets can provide the right stimulus. But of course, there are also a lot of problems with carbon markets, that they are actually not delivering what they're supposed to be delivering, or no, incentivizing bad behavior. So there's of course no silver bullet anywhere in sight, unfortunately. So we need to try out many different things, but I think there needs to be sort of a societal, political revolution that looks at the circular economy opportunities that recycles nutrient and carbon to farmers' fields, and that just needs to be fundamentally changes in the way we think and we do policy so that we can enable that recycling for the benefit of small-scale farmers.
Yes, who are producing 80% of our food.
Yes, absolutely. Good point. Yes, no, absolutely critical.
Yeah, very critical. Dr. Lehmann, I hope we can have another time in the near future. It has been such a pleasure having you. It's about 1 hour since we started talking, and I know we have a lot more that we could keep talking about. I am so honored that you took your time out of your busy
The honor is
schedule.
all mine.
Oh, thank you so much. Can you just give us like your parting shot?
Yeah, that's a good. I unfortunately, I don't have any real good words of wisdom, but I'm incredibly pleased and honored to be talking with you here about this, which is a testament to the focus on those who carry the largest burden for food security in countries such as Kenya, which is the small-scale farmers, and we do need to recognize the many constraints that are put on these farmers, and it would be the wrong way of saying, well, this is now all on you, and now we want you to also mitigate climate change for all the urbanites who are emitting greenhouse gases. So we need to use these policy levers to empower farmers and not put more burden on farmers. I think that would be very important. And I'm really pleased that we had this conversation, and I look forward to many more of these conversations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lehmann.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.
Thank you very much.